Taverim, welcome to the wilderness. We are beginning the book of Bamidbar, and with that, we will shortly begin the Israelite wandering through the wilderness on their way to the promised land. But before we do, we need to get organized, and essentially the beginnings of the book of Bamidbar are about the Israelite effort to organize itself. Because we're doing a triennial, we're going to start not with chapter 1, but with chapter 2, which is the beginning of the triennial. And Arnie, you should be on the right page. I think it's 774.
Okay, thank you. Got it. It is right there, 774.
774. Okay. But I want to at least spend a moment or two talking about chapter 1, because it's kind of it's sort of the net prelude to the creation that we're going to see in chapter 2. Statement 1. The Israelites in chapter 1 are commanded to perform a census. Not so unusual, but the way it's done and the way it's going to be organized reflects the fact that the Israelites are not just creating a moving Israelite camp, but they're creating a military camp. Right? So the census is designed, as was typical in the ancient Near East, to figure out exactly how many soldiers you had, so you would know how to organize them and what you could do in terms of going to battle. Right? How many of you are familiar with the musical Porgy and Bess? Okay. You remember the song, "It Ain't Necessarily So"? You know, those things in the Bible? Yeah, well, I apply that very, very generously to the census and the numbers that it yields, because the numbers are essentially impossible. The results of the census, if we take them in its most literal fashion, results in a Jewish population of 603,000 plus adult males of military capacity, which means that if you add women and children, you're looking at approximately 2 million people. 2 million people don't just hide in the Sinai Peninsula. I realize it's a big expanse, but it ain't that big. You can't just hide there for 40 years. Not to mention the fact that an army of 600,000 in that era would have been bigger than just about, I'm going to say not just, bigger than any army ever at that point in time. And we have some examples of huge armies. There's a description of a battle between the Assyrians and the Egyptians, where one side sends forth about 120,000 soldiers, and the other sends forth 12,000 soldiers, right? And those were considered massive, mega, unheard of sized armies. So to have an army of 600,000 is just, let's just say, it strains the credulity. So what do we do with the numbers? Right? On one level, our Israelite our biblical commentators kind of ignore it, and they take it for granted. Right? More modern commentators have struggled with this and suggest that we need to sort of look at the word that they use for 1,000 and read it differently. The problem is that none of the suggestions really work. They suggest reading it as a grouping, like a military unit, so that the first number of is not 54,000, but 54 units for a total of 500 and something men, right? That might be it yields a realistic number. The problem is you now have military units that are all sorts of different sizes, and that you can't divide the number by. But it at least brings the number into a more realistic form.
Is that 12 dividing into the number?
No, because if you look at the census, each tribe is enumerated separately. And therefore, you can have the tribe of Reuven. Let me just see if I can find one randomly. The tribe of Naphtali has 53 aluf, 400 men. So you've got, if you theoretically 53 units comprising 400 men. That doesn't, all right. Now 50 into 400 would be nice. You'd have small units of 8 men. Okay, yay, it works. But the numbers here, so they're struggling to make sense of it. For our purposes, I don't want to get bogged down in the numbers, other than to say they ain't necessarily so, but it reflects how the Israelites are thinking about this camp, right? Remember, at this moment in time, the Israelites are not planning on spending 40 years in the wilderness. The goal at this moment, the Israelites are camped at the foot of Sinai, and they're going to start their march toward the promised land, with the goal being to enter and conquer the promised land. You know, go directly to Israel, do not pass go, do not collect 200 shekels, do not do anything other than what you're supposed to. It's not going to be for another like 10 or 12 chapters where everything goes off the rails. So for the Israelites who've been encamped at the foot of Sinai for about 11 months, it's time to go. We've built the Mishkan, we've built the tabernacle. We now have the capacity, if you will, to take God with us on the road. That the magical moment of God appearing at Sinai is now becoming a more distant memory. But with the Mishkan, with the tabernacle, God's presence can follow us and help us succeed going forward. So that's sort of the quick version of chapter 1. And now I want to jump into chapter 2. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, "The Israelites shall camp each with his standard under the banners of their ancestral house. They shall camp around the tent of meeting at a distance." Okay, so what are we talking about here? I need to pop over to the computer and see if I can share my screen with you successfully.
That'll be the colors of the 12 tribes, right?
The standards, yes, they're military banners. Okay, so does anybody know what they look like? Of course not, but we have some examples of what people thought they looked like. Oops, I didn't want to. Hold on a second. Okay, go away. So I hope you're seeing this in TV land.
Nice. We see it very well.
Beverly's trying to say something that we can't hear.
Okay. So this is an ancient mosaic found in the northern part of Israel, right? And you see what are supposed to be reflections of each tribe. Sometimes they refer to a motif in the Bible. So, for example, in the top right corner, you have the tribe of Reuven, and the referent there is to is floral because if you remember the story of the tension between Rachel and her sister Leah, Leah is prolific and is producing kids at a rapid pace, and Rachel is barren. And so she turns to her sister and says, listen, I know that you are sad because Jacob is spending all his time with me, even though you are the one who's producing children for him. But if you give me Reuven's mandrakes, this floral thing that he found, you give it to me, I'll make sure that Jacob spends the night with you. Why? Mandrakes were thought to be a cure for barrenness, right? So in this depiction, Reuven is depicted by the mandrakes, right? Not sure why Shimon is a fortress, to tell you the honest truth. Levi is represented by the breastplate of the Kohen. Judah by elements that reflect on King David, though its more original tribal insignia was a lion, because that's how he's described by Jacob in his deathbed blessing. So these are reflective in some ways more of a later thought about the tribes, just to show you that there's no constants.
Play the 40s later on.
Yeah, because that's a very, very, quote, modern looking fort, right? So let's look at this one for a second. Let me see if I can make it bigger.
But the scales remind me of Gemini.
All right, so Reuven is still mandrakes. Shimon is still a fort. Levi is still Levi, but notice that Judah, which is the fourth one from the right on the top, is now the lion. And that image of the Lion of Judah has persisted. I'm not doing a commercial now. Right? Zevulun, for example, is routinely depicted as having a ship or ships because they were a coastal tribe and they were very maritime. Benjamin is a wolf because that's how Jacob refers to him in Jacob's blessing at the end of the book of Genesis. All right, the Jacob's blessing talks about Dan Yadin Amod. Dan shall judge. He plays off his name, Dan Yadin. He will be a judge. So you have the scales of justice, if you will, which is a much older motif than I realized. So again, are these accurate? Maybe, but it's a phenomenon that would have been familiar to our Israelite ancestors, and they would have known that they camped and they marched under their tribal insignia. I'm going to stop. Actually. I want to share one other thing with you, right? Because this will sort of be our focus for the next little while. Right? I want you to sort of just take note of the arrangement of the camp. So
I'm looking at this tent of meeting.
Yes.
So there's like a synagogal unit. In the very center is the tent of meeting. Later on, that'd be the synagogue, and around that would be all of the tribes.
Well, it's not a synagogal thing, but it's the tabernacle thing.
Right.
And yes, it's very much designed to be at the center, all right? The layout reflects, oops, sorry about that.
Our
The significance of various groups. So the tribe of Judah has emerges as the preeminent tribe. So they camp next to the sons of Aaron, who are the Kohanim, on the front side of the tent of meeting, which is also the eastern side. Right? Zevulun and Yissachar, along with Shimon, Ruvain, and Gad on the south, are all descendants of Leah. On the backside, on the western side, you have the Rachel tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim being Joseph's sons, and then Benjamin. And then you have the children of the concubines on the north side. Within that square, and filling out the inner square along with the sons of Aaron, are the three Levitical families. So the whole idea is that you have concentric squares of the Israelites. One of the interesting phenomena that I will share with you is that this was not an atypical military structure. We have a scene from Egypt from around this era, which shows that at the center of the camp was the Pharaoh's tent. Right? Remember, in ancient Egypt, Pharaoh was considered a demigod. So the deity and the monarch rolled into one are at the center, surrounded by the king's personal guard, surrounded by the rest of the army it's a little more of a rectangle than a square, but the essential idea is there. So it should surprise none of us that the Israelites who have just left Egypt organize in a fashion that would have been somewhat familiar. What's interesting is that as you get later in Israelite history, we discover that by the time of Samuel, Israelite encampments for war were no longer square but round, which we see echoes of, or is an echo of, what we see from Assyrian drawings and reliefs from around the same time. So it's clear that armies emulate armies.
because that's the old style of warfare. Here's the line, and you go against the other line.
That's actually even a little bit later, because this is about how you camp, not how you advance, right? Because the goal here is to create perimeters of protection.
Okay.
And so with the Pharaoh's camp, Ramesses II, it's the idea that the ultimate protection goes to what's at the center, and it's a protection against both human aggression and demonic defilement. Remember, they're worried about evil spirits, right? That finds a certain amount of echo in the Israelite reality, where what's the role of the sons of Aaron and the three clans of the Levites? Their role is to protect the tent of meeting against inappropriate trespass. Right? You want to come to shul? you can come to shul kind of anytime you want, as long as you got a fob. You don't have a fob, stay out. Which is, but the reality is you didn't need special permission to come. In the ancient world, you didn't go to the Mishkan quite so easily. You came and you brought a sacrifice, and it had to be purposeful. And when you got to the front of the tent of meeting, which was on the east side where the sons of Aaron were, one of the Levitical clansmen would accompany you, and you, along with your Levitical escort and one of the Kohanim, would enter into the courtyard of the tent of meeting so that you could do your sacrifice, but you were heavily watched so that you wouldn't do anything inappropriate. And that same idea kind of carried over into the temple in Jerusalem once it was built. I will say that I don't know that I fully really appreciated this until some years ago when I was visiting Israel, and my friend Howard and I hooked up with a small group that was going onto the Temple Mount. I mean, going onto the Temple Mount has gotten more challenging over the years. And so one of the things that was true about this group at the time, this was at least a decade ago, right? The group could not be larger than 9 because they didn't want a minion on the Temple Mount. This was the Waqf, right? Right? Because you're not allowed to stop and pray up there. I mean, this is part of the trying to balance everybody's religious sensitivities, if you will. So we go up, but we're not alone. There is someone from the Waqf who is walking along, not with us, but very near us, right? And what is he watching for? That we don't, because you're not allowed to stop. You're not supposed to stop, because if you're stopped, you might be praying. So you're supposed to just keep moving. And in addition to the 1 or 2 people from the Waqf who are sort of walking with us, but sort of trying to be very nonchalant, which doesn't really work. It's like the Secret Service who pretend to blend into stuff, but cannot possibly, They're
all hard of hearing.
Yeah, that's the only thing that gives them away. And watching the men from the Waqf and watching us are soldiers, Israeli soldiers, who are stationed up on the Temple Mount. So it's like, oh, I feel just like one of my Israelite ancestors coming to the Mishkan or the temple, and I've got an escort to make sure that I don't do anything that I ought not do. Because violating sacred space is a big no-no and can have disastrous consequences for the Israelites. Right? So you couldn't just come whenever you wanted to. And when you did, you didn't just, it wasn't just like, come on in. It's like, just a minute, let me get someone to help you, quote unquote.
The drawing up there, which I find very interesting. Who made that decision and how was it made?
The layout is defined by the Torah here in chapter 2.
But how was that decision made as to who's going to be behind this? The son of Aaron, how do they decide which?
Well, on one level, I guess that goes to the question of how do you understand the very text of the Bible itself? Theoretically, this is God says X, therefore that's what happens. So if I want to give you a very traditional answer, God says on the eastern side will be the tribe of Judah, and they'll be flanked by X and Y. On the southern side will be the tribe of Reuven, and they'll be flanked by X and Y.
But if you skip the God piece.
If I skip the God piece.
And if you ever set a head table. you've got, and you got people at the head table, you always have a big argument as to who's gonna be on the head table and who's gonna be to the right and who's gonna be left and who's gonna be on the end.
Yes, so here I would suggest that the primacy of Judah, at least, and again, does this accurately depict what the Israelite camp looked like when they left the foot of Sinai? I don't know, maybe. Or does it depict the priority of tribes at a later point in history?
Okay.
Judah becomes the preeminent tribe from the time of David onwards, right? David is the first king who comes from the tribe of Judah, and all of his descendants are the monarchs until the destruction, and then the lineage goes forward. You know, Hillel is ascribed to be a descendant of King David. So there's this whole idea that once they are given this divine imprimatur that they are in charge, they are in charge. So if I'm the redactor of the Bible, all right, call me Ezra, all right, for lack of a better name. All right, I'm Ezra, and I'm putting this into its final form, and I'm going, oh, okay, how are we gonna, we got this wonderful arrangement. I'm not gonna mess with the concept, but Judah probably should be front and center, right? What's the most important side of the camp? It's the eastern side. That's where the front of the tent of meeting is. That's where the sons of Aaron, who are the most important part of the tribe of Levi, are. Therefore, the most important, quote, secular tribe should be there as well. And then you sort of go, Reuven was the original firstborn and maintained a certain amount of primacy. Plus, Reuven and Gad are two of the tribes that stay eventually on the eastern side of the Jordan. So to have them together is not so surprising. And Shimon is just sort of kind of filling out that side because he's, in terms of the birth order, it's Reuven, Shimon, Levi, who's sort of taken out of this outer perimeter and put in the center, and then Judah. So Dan was the preeminent tribe amongst the tribes of the concubines. So it makes sense for him to be at the center of his side with the other concubine tribes. And yes, someone's going to say to me, but Rabbi, there were 4 concubine tribes. Yes, that's true. God, which was the first of the concubine tribes to be born, gets moved onto the side with Shimon and Reuven in order to fill out that side, because there were 6 Leah tribes, but one of them was Levi, and they get moved out into the middle. So you need to fill it. So conveniently, I moved the tribe of Gad, and they're next to the tribe of Reuven because they operate together through most of the biblical period. So is that where they were at the foot of Sinai? I'm not sure, but it reflects the fact that they were paired routinely and regularly from the time of the conquest onward. And conveniently, you've got 3 groupings of Rachel tribes to fill out the 4th side. And of the 3, Ephraim was always the dominant. And that remains true even after the kingdom splits, because the tribe of Ephraim is the dominant tribe in the north. Okay. So we've got this interest. So we've got this arrangement of the tribes, if you will. I'm going to get rid of this little map so that we can see each other again. Here we go. Okay, so what else can we sort of glean from what is kind of a very basic non-storyline here? Part of what we have to recognize is that the terminology here is some of the earliest linguistic examples of how the Israelites describe themselves. So, for example, they use the term nasi, meaning chieftain, which eventually is supplanted by the term shofet, meaning judge. Right? But chieftains had tremendous power within their tribal grouping. So a chieftain was the head of his clan and had ultimate authority. All the chieftains together would choose someone to represent the tribe, and that tribal person would represent the tribe at national meetings. Right? Those tended to be kind of ad hoc gatherings, and they sort of fall into disuse once you have a monarch. Monarchs remarkably don't feel the need to be all that consultative. I know that's shocking to say, but there you go. Right? So what do we call a tribe in here? We call it a shevet. Right? It's not. We're used to the terminology, but a shevet is a synonym for the word mateh, which means stick or rod. Okay? Why? Because each tribe would have its rod indicating authority. It was that person's insignia, if you will, of authority. So we're sort of getting a little glimpse into this ancient language, which also echoed much of what we saw in the ancient Near East. So where it talks about here being camped under your degel, under your banner, well, Akkadian gives us Dagalu, and Ugaritic gives us Diglu, right? Diglu, Dagalu, Degel. They're all cognates of each other in various Semitic languages, and it just shows how, I'll say, integrated the Israelites were in the ancient world. For as much as we sometimes talk about and think of them in isolation, the reality is they don't exist in isolation. They brought the model of a military camp with them from Egypt. As they grow and evolve, they reflect all of the realias of the world around them. What else? I realize we haven't done what we normally do, so I'm going to do it now. Right? We read the first couple of verses, right? But I want you to look for a second at the end of verse 2. The Israelites shall camp each with his standard, his degel, his insignia, under the banners of their ancestral house. So you not, in addition to this tribal one, you had clan versions of a similar thing. The closest equivalent that I can think of is if you look at medieval heraldry, where you had certain colors that connected you, right? But you would also have something that represented your house, if you will. I suppose if I was talking to a slightly younger cohort, I might say, think Hogwarts. But it's really picking up on that medieval idea of, you've got 4 houses. You've got Slytherin and Ravenclaw and I know they'll come back to me. Gryffindor, and whatever the last one is. But remember, this school is supposed to be 1,000 years old. So of course they would have banners and heraldry that would be of a medieval nature. The other thing I will just note to you is that many biblical scholars believe that the background color of the banner of the tribe, regardless of whatever insignia was emblazoned on it, would have been the same as the color of the gemstone which represented them in the breastplate of the Kohen. Which sounds nice. It's sort of a constant, if you will. So if you guys are azure, you're azure, and that's your stone, and that's your banner color, and that's your. I don't know if that is in fact accurate in any way, shape, or form, but it's kind of intriguing. Right? The other thing that I'll just highlight at the end of verse 2, it says, "You shall camp around the tent of meeting at a distance." What's meant at a distance? Right? The rabbis do not like vagaries. So at a distance means 2,000 cubits. Anybody want to take a guess? Why 2,000 cubits? Come on.
What's the size of 2,000 cubits?
2,000. Well, a cubit is about 18 inches. So 2,000 cubits would be about 3,000 feet, which is about 1,000 yards, or 10 football fields, not counting the end zones. And less if you're talking about Canadian football, because Canadian football fields are 110 yards long without the end zones, which are also much bigger. 2,000 cubits becomes the measure of how far you get to walk on Shabbos outside of city limits. Right? So it's possible that we're seeing a little bit of retrograde, wherein a newer number is used, because the rabbis are going, okay, so what does at a distance mean? And so their response to at a distance means, oh, we know that 2,000 feet is the maximum distance you can go, and we don't want people to be going beyond that. So therefore, the furthest Israelite can't be more than 2,000 cubits from the tent of meeting, so that they can go on Shabbos. Okay, what's the other problem with that statement? The problem is that the Israelites encamped here probably didn't go to the tent of meeting every Shabbos. That would, the rabbis are sort of applying their norms and practices to their Israelite ancestors. Why do we go to shul on Shabbat? We go to shul on Shabbat to pray as a community and to hear words of Torah and hear the Torah read and the Haftarah, the words of the prophets. We do it for all of that, right? How was Shabbat observed by our ancient Israelite ancestors? Throw an extra cow on the altar and we're done. That was how you observed Shabbat.
But your children also don't move from the 2,000 feet. Therefore, your children stay in the neighborhood, they don't go out to Seattle.
Well, neither does kind of anybody. The
Well,
idea,
that's what I mean, you just stay within.
you're staying close to home. It's about spending time, right? But again, that's the rabbis thinking about how they do stuff and applying it backwards in time, even though it's illogical. But we do that a lot with the familiar. We assume that what is normative for us would have been normative for fill in the blank. And their reality and our reality are very different. But when there are gaps, we fill in the gaps with what is known.
When did you start going to synagogue on Shabbat?
That's a great question. The answer is, ich weiß nicht. I can't. The problem is, I remember reading an article that talked about the origin of the synagogue. And the article summarized all the various different positions on the question of when the synagogue comes into being. And there are about 10 different centuries in which the article suggests the synagogue may have come into being. Right? If you remember the story of Elijah, he goes, who spends some time with this Shunammite woman, and he says to her, you know, you're always very hospitable to me. What can I do? And she's going like, do you need me to intercede with the government on your behalf? What do you need? Just tell me, and I'll make it happen. And he's going like, I don't need everything. I'm in my community. I'm thriving. I'm doing great. I don't need anything. And his Lynn's almost, no. She and her husband have never had children. And Elijah's going like, okay, there you go. And poof, miracle that she has a child, and the child starts to grow up, and then he suffers from heat stroke and he collapses, and they assume he's dead. And Elijah is called in, but how does he get called in? The woman says, put him in the room that we normally set aside for Elijah. And she goes and she grabs a donkey to ride on. And she's going like, and her husband's going like, where are you going? Well, I'm going to see the prophet. And his answer to her is that, Lo Shabbat v'lo Rosh Chodesh. It's not Shabbos. It's not the new month. Why are you going? And she's going like, just leave me alone. Right? Well, from his question or his statement, one can assume that she would routinely go to wherever the prophet was on Shabbat or Rosh Chodesh. Was that the synagogue? Not necessarily, but we know that Samuel, even earlier, would travel around the country and bring people together for a sacrifice and a celebration and probably some sort of, I'll call it teaching. So for some scholars, they point to the prophets, Samuel and Elijah, as hosting tent revival meetings kind of thing. And that's sort of, they say, there you go. That's the roots of the synagogue. And then, you've got different people talking, about Daniel creates it when he's in Babylonia or the Babylonian Jews created because they need something to bring them together while they're in exile. And so they need a place to gather, and they need a place to pray together, and they start, right? So and all sorts of theories as to the when.
So the Israelites at that time obviously didn't have a Torah. They had a couple of tablets that were supposedly handed down to Moses, right?
Yes.
But this Torah is written about the travails of these people So they didn't have too much written word to
At-
learn from.
Correct. At this point, now, they do have one advantage, which is they've got this dude named Moses who seems to be able to communicate directly with God and get the inside information on whatever the subject is. But the idea of studying Torah is in modern Jewish thought normative, but is a later phenomenon. The book of Deuteronomy, which is a later book of the Bible, talks about gathering the people together once every 7 years and reading this to them. Right? Now, reading this to them is an interesting exercise, but it's not the same as even doing what we're doing, is saying, okay, we're going to focus on this chapter because that's designated for this week. Now, I can only imagine what one of these gatherings was like. And how did they present it? And did they, in fact, read this whole document? The story stuff is easy. There's some storytelling was a thing. That's what people did. Remember, they didn't have, 4,000 channels to flip through only to discover that there's nothing on. Right? Storytelling was what you did. All right, so to tell the stories of creation, to tell the stories of Noah and the patriarchs and the Exodus, this is great theater. And my guess is that when the storytellers told them, they probably embellished on what we have, because we have a very terse kind of narrative. Do I think that they plowed through the way we did the entire book of Leviticus with all of its arcane laws? I'm not as convinced. Would they have spoken about some of the stuff that apply to our ancestors who lived agrarian lifestyles? Yeah. It's like, so let me tell you, Mr. Farmer, when you go home, these are the rules. You need to leave the corners of your field for the poor. You need to engage in these other practices to help provide for others in the community. So I'm sure there was an element of that, but was this the text that they got verbatim? Probably not. They probably got a lot more expanded story and a limited amount of law. Law was what you ran into a problem. You went to the person, the Levite or the Kohen who was in charge locally and said, so what's the deal? And no attorneys were involved. You got a meeting. Anytime.
Thank you.
I will.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
I know that the Torah, do you have something else you want to cover first?
No, go ahead.
I know that the Torah is not exact in terms of its chronology. I'm finished with the golden calf. I've got the Mishkan. When do we have the arrangement of the camp? Because I'm thinking the 12 tribes, and we don't talk about the 12 tribes when it comes to the golden calf. We talk about
The people.
The people. And that's
Right.
collective. We don't say this house versus that house, they're the following.
Right.
But
So-
so Mishkan, you do. You talk about each one did an equal thing.
So I'm going to suggest that this is the point which formalizes the structure of the camp.
Okay.
My guess is that people throughout the period of wandering from Egypt to the foot of Sinai. And for the period of time that they're encamped at Sinai, are probably operating within their clans. You know, kind of you're stuck to your people, and you know, this clan probably hung out with that clan. Here you're getting because you're transforming it from a group of slaves who are running away to get away to, oh, we now have a project to do. So it doesn't matter if a clan from the tribe of Reuven is living next to a clan from the tribe of Shimon. It's all good because we're just kind of hanging out, which is really what people were doing unless they were actively involved in the construction process of building the Mishkan. Once you have the Mishkan, okay, where are we going to put it? We built it. Where are we going to put it? All right, we're putting it in the middle. Okay? And then we put the Levites and the Kohanim in an inner circle around it, or an inner square around it to protect it. And then we're going to leave here. And when we leave here, we're going to the land of Israel and we're going to war. So I organize the camp at this point to serve the next essential step or purpose, which is military. So my guess is it was much more haphazard before this, though I'm guessing clans, and my guess is that if you were part of a Judah clan, you probably hung out with other Judah clans more so than Reuven clans or other clans, just because that was a more comfortable kind of thing.
Segregation.
Self-selection. It becomes especially important, actually not so much here as it does when they get to the land of Israel, because each tribe gets its piece of land, and you don't want, a little section of Shimon now being owned by someone from God, and you don't want someone from God owning a little piece of territory that belongs to Naphtali, and you don't want a guy from Naphtali owning a piece of Ephraim territory.
Segregation.
Yeah. Bye. Sorry, could not read. All right, so this is the organizational moment because now it's necessary. Could it have happened earlier? Sure, but it's relevant and important at this point because after the organization and the assignment of roles and responsibilities, it's at that point that you get to, okay, everybody, hit the road. But you can't hit the road until you are ready.
Organized. You know what I thought? I know you watch movies. Did you ever watch The Gladiator?
Sure.
Okay, there's a scene in the movie. It's the first one where they're in Rome. Is that how you may have been in the military? If you act individually, you will die. But they all got together as one group. So therefore, you got your 12 tribes as a group. Therefore, you are stronger as opposed to individual. You probably will be killed.
Yep. Okay. And one of the realities is this model of organization seems to carry through the book of Joshua, but it seems to collapse or not exist in the book of Judges, where tribes are hard pressed and they look for local tribal groupings to fend off the problem. So is this, how accurate this is interesting. And does it, once people get into their own separate spaces, devolve because I don't need it the same way anymore. Um, the, look, I'll use this as an imperfect example. Okay. During the Revolutionary War, who fought against whom?
British fought against the colonists, but they had other people come in.
Okay, but the colonies as a group banded together to fight against the British. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Fast forward from 1776 to 1861,
They were divided.
they fight against each other, right? So what happened to that? Oh, we're all together. We're like this. Well, 100 years of, well, you're doing your thing and I'm doing my thing and your thing are maybe not quite so simpatico as they used to be. And don't tell me how to do my thing and blah, 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 blah. It's messy, right? And it's divided. So what was gets pulled apart by a whole host of factors. And I'm going to suggest that that was true for the Israelites as well. Once they're all settled in the land to whatever degree, it's like, so the tribe of Naphtali that's on the shore is, oh, we do our maritime thing. And I really don't care what's happening down in the tribe of Judah because I have no interaction with them ever. So what do I care?
Interesting.
Thank you.